Hello everybody, it's Mike here at Game from Scratch, and today we are answering the age-old question of what is the ideal laptop for game development. Actually, this is one of the most commonly asked questions I get. So back in 2016 I did a guide, back in 2018 I did a guide, and today I'm doing a guide for 2019. And we're just kind of updating it to look at the new tech that's out there. Interestingly enough, the 2018 guide is actually still quite relevant. A lot of the machines that were recommended back then are kind of on clearance now, but are still perfectly viable. So we're going to go through, we're going to look at what it changed in the world of game development and in the world of laptops in general, what you need to look for depending on the task you're looking for in game development, and hopefully we can help you find the right laptop for you. Additionally, I'm going to link a bunch of these laptops all on Amazon so you can compare them side by side. That will be linked down below. Additionally, I will link a timestamp that goes straight to the recommendation section. If you've already got a pretty good grasp of the technology and the trade-offs involved in choosing a laptop, you just want to go to the recommendations, look for the timestamp down below. All right, so for everyone else, first off, what is new in 2019? Well, the biggest thing there is RTX, or real-time ray tracing. Now, this is NVIDIA's branding, RTX is anyways, and it is to support better real-time lighting and shadows by having real ray tracing basically happen on the hardware. Now, the reception to RTX has been a little bit mixed. It's been supported in probably a dozen games, and there's a pretty big performance hit on the first gen. It's pushing a lot of these high-end cards under that 60 frames per second that so many people target. And there aren't a lot of must-buy RTX games out there. So what actually happened is NVIDIA also released a follow-up series of cards, the 1650 and the 1660, which are kind of like a bump up from the 10 series of cards, but they're not, so they're based on the same technology, but they don't have the RTX cores of the modern era cards. So that is the biggest new change there. Also, kind of on the horizon, not quite here yet, but there are rumors that AMD has some really interesting chips coming very, very soon, including in the upcoming Surface. But again, that is always rumors, and that is one of those rumors that has happened again and again and again. But the biggest thing that really happened in 2018 and 2019 is the thin and nice looking portable laptop for gaming became just commonplace. Every single manufacturer offers one. So basically, at first there was Razer, and there was a couple of other companies that came on board like MSI and Gigabyte. Now everybody has a thin and light laptop, and that's a nice development. I definitely like seeing that. Also, prices have gone up. RTX is expensive, unfortunately. But the nice thing is the release of the 1650 and 1660 series of cards have shown us some lower price point laptops. So that's definitely a nice thing. So first thing you're going to have to figure out is what exactly kind of game development are you going to be doing? There is a broad spectrum. So if you're coming at this and you're trying to create 2D pixel art, truth of the matter is any laptop will work. You just need to run something like ASC Sprite or GIMP or Krita or whatever, entry-level paint applications, even the commercial stuff out there, Toon Boom and Flash and so on and so forth. So whatever you need to run, almost all of it will run on just about any machine out there. A touchscreen might be nice, but most people would use something like a Wacom tablet on the side anyways. So if you're doing 2D pixel art, you probably don't need a ton, to be honest. Now, if you're working at the world of 3D modeling and animation, that's a different story, and a lot of that's going to come down to the polygon count of what you're working with. But the number one thing that you're going to need in 3D art is a good GPU. That's the graphics processor unit. That is what is built in, and that is really where the price kind of jumps for laptops. You got integrated graphics are not good enough for most 3D work. So that's where you jump to a dedicated GPU, and in that case, you're going to want probably at least a 1060. That's from last generation. A 1060 card or better. So that means a 1060, a 1070, a 1080, or the new generation 2060, 2070, 2080, or one of those in-between cards like the 1650 and the 1660. So you're going to want a GPU for sure if you are into modeling and animation. On top of that, you're going to want a decent CPU and a decent amount of RAM. You can get a machine out there with 8 gigs of RAM, but I really wouldn't recommend it. You're going to want 16 as probably the baseline minimum. If you're a programmer, CPU is more important in that particular case for compiling code. If you're literally just writing code, which is very rare in this day and age, you're not so much going to need the GPU. But if you're writing your code in something like Unreal Engine or Unity or so on, you're going to need to have enough horsepower and grunt to actually open the project that you're entering your code in. But the big things for a programmer are RAM, memory, and the solid-state drive. I'm going to get back to that one in a few minutes. Now, the first one where there is a baseline cutoff is if you're interested in doing VR development, if you want to do virtual reality, so you want to run something like an HTC Vive, an Oculus Rift, or a Microsoft Mixed Reality headset, you're going to need at least a 1060 GPU. So last generation's mid-level GPU, you need that. That is literally the baseline. So the year before was the 970, the 1060, 1070, 1080, and so on. You need to have at least that as a baseline to do any virtual reality work. It literally will not run on less than that. So you're going to want a decent GPU for VR requirement, but that one is literally a cutoff. So you need to have at least a 1060 or a 970 card. And there's one thing to learn there. Is basically you can look at the previous generation's card. So you've got the 960 and 970. So you get 970 is about equivalent to a 1060, which is equivalent to about a 1050 if it existed, and so on. So almost every generation is about the same speed as the version that was one higher. It's a little confusing at times, but if you're looking at getting an older machine, you can basically look at last gen's 1080 is about equivalent to this gen's 2070. Just keep that as a general rule of thumb. So those are the kind of base rules. Now, honestly, my baseline spec I would recommend to anybody. You want at least 16 gigabytes of RAM. Probably no more, actually. That's sort of the sweet spot, but you're going to want 16 gigabyte RAM for most tasks, just to make your operating system run well, to make your game engine not, choke under resources or have to swap out to the hard drive for more space. You're also going to want to have at least an i5 or an i7 GPU, I think. Anything lower than that, you're going to probably get frustrated with it. And then my number one thing, you want an SSD. It is not negotiable. You want your operating system to be running on an SSD drive. It is profound how much of a difference that makes. Like, we're talking seconds to boot your computer, like literally 4 or 5 seconds, or maybe up to a minute. An SSD makes just a huge performance difference across the entire gambit. Now, another thing you're going to find in this particular year's list, there's no MacBooks on it. I don't know what the heck is going on at Apple, but this year's models of MacBooks, they're just terrible. They're absolutely terrible. They have quality problems. They have keyboard problems. They have lousy GPUs. They have thermal issues. They are expensive. They have that idiotic touch bar, which makes running in different operating systems really tricky and makes it so you don't have function keys, which is kind of a non-starter for programmers. Honestly, if you want to work with an Apple MacBook, look for a 2016 MacBook Pro. It's all been downhill since then, which is a shame. I actually am not an Apple hater, but their current laptops are they're trash in my opinion. So anyways, that is where I would say the big time recommendations come in. You're going to want that SSD. You're going to want 8 gigs might get you by, but you're really going to probably want 16 as the limit. Do not buy a 4 gig machine. GPU, of course, that is going to be that's where prices jump up. If you want a machine with a decent GPU, you're going to spend at least $1,000. That's kind of the reality of this scenario. Now, the final real thing that kind of gets in here is like the informal stuff, the fit and finish size. I consider anything over, say, 5.5 to 6 pounds. It's too heavy to carry in a backpack for too long. Now, you may not care about that, but I look at 6 pounds as about the drop off. I look at 15 inches about the upper limit in size you want. You can get 17 machines. They're just really quite heavy and hard to port around. Your opinion entirely, but what you get is this trade-off of size, cost, and thermals. Thermals is very important. It's why a machine that might look really good on paper isn't so great. Dell, XPS. We'll get back to that. On top of that, battery is important. To a lot of people, if you're going to be plugged in 99% of the time and you basically are just using your laptop as a way of bringing a computer to the toilet with you, you don't care about battery. But it is one of those areas where it can make a big difference. The average, I think, is probably about 3 hours now, which is decent. You're going to get better battery life out of these machines. But some of the higher end stuff, shipping with almost 100 watt-hour batteries, which is the maximum you can legally bring on an airplane. And it shows up. So you can get in 7-8 hours out of game laptops, which is just insane. Now, obviously, if you're running on battery and you're using it to play games, you're going to get 2 hours at best. So do keep that in mind if you're just going to wail on it. And the final thing that kind of comes down here, and this one is really going to come down to personal preference, is your screen. You've got so many different options when it comes to screen. IPS panels versus OLED now is becoming more common. There's also matte and TN, and each one of those has their trade-offs. OLEDs have the best blacks out there, period. IPS has good viewing angles. Matte has great outdoor performance, but really kind of a muddy picture quality. A lot of it kind of comes down to how glossy do you want your screen? How bright do you want your screen? Do you want 1080p, which is the normal desktop gaming resolution, or do you want 4K, which is more of a battery sucker, but great on your eyes and great for creators reproducing color values? Do you want to care about refresh rate? This is a big thing this year in laptops. You're seeing a lot more 144 hertz machines, for example, which is the speed at which the display will refresh. So if you've got a machine capable of putting out 150 frames per second, but you've got a 60 hertz display, guess what? You're running at 60 frames per second. That's just the reality of how these things work. Now, there's technologies like G-Sync and FreeSync, which enable you to run it, not the full amount, but as good as you can get, and it minimizes the tearing and the artifacts that it have as a result. But those are the things you really kind of got to trade off. And that's the thing with laptops. You're always making a trade-off. If you want small, good battery life, good thermals, good GPU in a high quality form factor, you can actually get that. You're just paying out your ass. If you want, you don't care about the size, but you want good performance and you don't care about battery life, you can get that and you can save some money. So we're going to look at a bit of a mix of every combination out there. So sometimes if you're looking at something that's really expensive and you're like, why is that so expensive? Well, a lot of times it's going to be really expensive because it was made with high quality materials, or it's made with machined aluminum or magnesium and has a cooling solution, and it's quite small, and you pay for all of that engineering. Whereas if something's really cheap, you got to keep in mind the materials used to make it are generally quite cheap too. So there are trade-offs in all things, and then some things are just expensive for expensive sake. So without further ado, let us jump in. We're going to do this alphabetical. I'm going to point out some of the key brands from major manufacturers. Your opinions may vary, of course, your values may vary, but what we are going to do is start in the A's, and we have a strange number of computers starting with A, but the first one we've got is Acer. Now, Acer probably has two major standout brands. There's the Acer Helios 300, which is one of the most recommended entry-level game laptops out there. So you're looking at about $1,000, you can get a 1660 GPU. So no real-time ray tracing there, but you can 1660 GPU, 16 gigs of RAM, an SSD card, and a 6-core Intel processor for about $1,000. And amazingly enough, you can get a pretty solid, long-lasting battery out of that too. So that's why the Helios 300 is such a popular. Now, it's plastic on the top. The build quality isn't amazing. It's not incredibly small. It's 5.2 pounds, I think, or about 5 pounds anyways, which is pretty average, to be honest. So it's not the highest quality material you've ever seen, but it's big enough and vented enough that you get good thermal performance out of it. Now, one of the downsides for thermals is if something runs too hot, it has to slow down, otherwise it will do damage. So there's no point in having a machine that has great hardware in it, that has an i9 processor and a top-end GPU, if it's going to thermal throttle, which is one of the big problems with the Dell XPS this generation and the MacBook Pro. So the thermals are actually quite important in this space. And this guy has decent thermals, decent battery, decent cost, decent GPU. All around, it's decent. And like I said, about $1,000, which as far as this stuff goes, is a pretty good bargain. Next up from the Acer, go slightly higher end. We have the Triton line. Now this is more upscale materials. It's a metal base. I think it's what is this one? Is it aluminum or magnesium? But anyways, this one is a higher build quality. It's thinner, it's lighter. So that is really what you're paying for there. You get a 300 megahertz, 3 millisecond display. So if a really sharp display is your thing, you're seeing here, it's got that G-Sync technology. So even if you can't obviously put out 300 frames per second, it can deal with whatever frame rate you stick out there, which is definitely nice. And you get a decent GPU in there. So this case, you could get, one example I spec'd was a 27 Max-Q GPU, 144 megahertz display for about $1,600 to $2,000, depending on which GPU you also pick. So for $1,600, you'd get the 2060 GPU, whereas the $2,000 would be the 2070. Now, in this case, they're Max-Q. That's a name I haven't really mentioned yet. Max-Q is basically a slightly slowed down version. So a 280, in this case, Max-Q, is going to be slower than a 280, but it's also going to run within a certain sound threshold and battery sucking threshold and heat threshold as defined by this standard. So you're going to get slightly slower performance than the full fat version of a 280, but it's going to take a lot less battery, going to make a lot less noise, and so on. So that's one of those things you're going to see quite commonly is Max-Q. A lot of times you can actually look at a 2070 Max-Q is kind of close to a 2080 Max Q is close to a 2070 in performance. All right, next up, we're going on to Asus. Now, Asus is big in this space. They've got their ROG, or Republic of Gamers line, and I'm going to focus on a couple of them. The first one looking at here is the Strix G. This is available in a ton of different formats, but you can get it for a decent, about $1,000 price mark as well. So this one compares to the Helios 300 as an entry-level machine. That one, again, is worth a $1,650, I think, in that particular case. The nice thing is it also comes with a 1 gigabyte SSD drive. Most of these will actually have an SSD card, and again, I would make that an absolute requirement here. Now, the downsides to the Strix G is your battery life is not great, like 2 hours kind of just daily usage. And on top of that, it's 5.2 pounds, a little bit on the bigger side. It's not huge by any means, but it's not small. But that's the Strix G. Now, if you've got all the money in the world, they also have the Zephyrus line. They have a number of different laptops out there, to be honest, but the Zephyrus is kind of their marquee line. Now, one of the things about the Zephyrus that it's going to be very alienating or polarizing, I guess. Hopefully there's a picture of it on here somewhere. Come on, scroll down. Keep going. Yeah, so here, they move their keyboard to the front. This is kind of got a mixed bag. It allows them to do much better thermals on the back end here, but they have the number, so the mouse pad is off to your right, and it's right at the very front of your laptop. So if you're literally using this laptop in your lap, that could get frustrating. Otherwise, one of the things I really like with this year in general is that they don't look like Boy Racer laptops anymore. It's not, you know, speed stripes and stuff on the back. They're pretty sedated. So if you brought this into a meeting with a client, you're not going to look like you're on, you know, a toy machine by any means. Now, this the Zephyrus is available in just about everything. You can get up to a 2080 card, an i9 processor. The nice thing here is it is 0.6 inches thin, like so tip to top. It's one of the lightest out there. It's 4.5 pounds. You can get them like super stacked, but you're also going to be paying. You're paying at least $2,000 for one of these, starting at, and it goes up from there. But they do have, there you see, good good venting. You can see because of the way they allocated everything and moved things around, you do get good thermals out of it, and you don't get throttling as a result. Also, I believe that the battery life on the Zephyrus is actually quite good, unlike the Strix G. I think it comes with a rather large size battery, so that is definitely a nice thing. But you are going to be paying for it. That's kind of the downside once again. So next up, we are moving into the land of Dell. Now, one of the ones that really looks really desirable at times is the SPS 15. They're expensive. They're incredibly well made. They're beautiful laptops. They have beautiful displays. You can get the 2060, I think, is the best GPU you can get in them. They're expensive, and the form factor has not been updated in years, and this case will thermal throttle. So I do not recommend an XPS 15 for gaming anyways. It is not an ideal machine in that regard. Now, if you do want gaming, this is kind of a new one, is Alienware, which is owned by Dell. Alienware has actually been one of the biggest laptop names for game developers. If you walked into a game development studio, you would see a ton of Alienware laptops strewn about. But they were also like 900 pounds each. They could be used as a personal defense weapon, which was an upside to the old Alienwares. The downside is they were gigantic, like 8-9 pound beasts for the 15-inch models. Well, recently they started actually addressing that. So now we have the M15 model here. I find it a little ugly personally, but at the same time, this guy is 4.7 pounds and 0.8 inches thick. Much more portable than any Alienware has ever been in the past. They're available in a number of configs. The one that I spec'd out was an M15 with a 2060 GPU, an i7-9750 CPU, 16 gigs of RAM, a 512 gigabyte SSD card, and that was $1,850. So not the cheapest you can see out there, but Alienware are pretty rock solid in what they can do. And as you see, there are a ton of different ones here, and you can spend as much money as you want. Now, what's interesting though, is they're a generation behind on their CPUs. The GPUs got updated to the current generation. So you got the 2070s going on here, but we're into the 9th generation for Intel. So I'm shocked that they haven't updated that yet. Expect a new update, hopefully pretty soon, so that fixes that. And then you will see these hopefully be sold off on a cheaper price as a result. Now, the final option coming out of Dell, and here we're saying this is Canada. So you expect that to be more like $1,000 is where you start. And that's their G15 15-inch gaming laptop line. You can actually get decent specs going on here. I do find the build quality is not quite up to snuff to a lot of these other things, but at the same time, you can get a 1650 GPU, 6-core Intel processor, 16 gigs of RAM, great battery life, and an SSD for just over $1,100. So if you can handle being slightly bigger, you know, these 6 pounds, that's unfortunate. You can get a good price here. So if portability isn't your biggest thing and build quality is not the top of your list, the G series from Dell is actually a pretty good buy. And what you'll find interesting here is they are, in fact, updated to the 9th gen, unlike the Alienware. So I'm not sure where Alienware is lagging there, but definitely the bargain value from Dell anyways. Next up, we're into Gigabyte. I love Gigabyte. Gigabyte was, so basically the thin and light came from Razer. Razer definitely led the way there, but then the Aero came out, and the Aero 15 has been a stunner of a machine. And you actually get this guy in OLED if you so wish. OLED is more often used in TVs. The nice thing is with OLED, black is black. Black is literally off. So if you got a lot of black on your screen, you're going to use less battery. You're going to get the best blacks you can get, period. And at the same time, this guy is 0.75 inches thick, 4.5 pounds. You can have up to a 2080 GPU, an i9 processor, solid thermals. I think it struggles a little bit this year, but not you know, brutally like the XPS. And the most impressively, the biggest laptop battery I've seen. It's 98 watt-hour battery. So you can get like of just general use. You know, like I'm doing things like surfing the web and some light coding and that kind of stuff, like 8 hours out of this thing. And I like the look of it as well. Their other big gimmick this year is Azure AI, which it sounds like it's just a gimmick, to be honest. So there is that. On top of that, if you want to spend a little bit less money and get a little bit less quality, there's also the Aorus? I should know, this is the name of my eGPU, but I don't know how to say that. Aorus, if you know, comments down below and all that. But as you can see, this one is the same kind of concept, much bigger. It's an inch thick, 5.3 pounds, so almost a pound heavier than the other one. But at the same time, it's about 50% cheaper. So you can get a range of GPUs from the 1650 all the way up to the 2070. So if being small and portable isn't really that important, the Aorus is definitely an option. Now, unfortunately, this guy does not have the monster battery that the Aero does, so expect a couple hours out of it tops. Next up, we are moving on to HP. And I gotta be honest, I don't understand HP. I don't know why HP exists. I don't know anyone that has ever bought an HP. But they always have one line out there, the Omen. And as you can see, they're a generation behind. They will update at some point. I think they even already have, but they just haven't updated their website, or I don't know. I don't get HP. I don't know why you would buy HP, but I'm putting it out there. So there is HP. They have their Omen line. Some people, I assume, love them because they keep making them every year. So yeah, there's the HP Omen. So next up, we move on to Lenovo. Now, Lenovo used to have a couple of great options. I actually bought a Yoga 720 my last round and hooked it up to an external GPU as my compromise choice. And now the standout, if you're going to buy a Lenovo laptop for gaming, it's kind of a no-brainer. You're going to be getting the Legion. And the Legion line of laptops it's kind of a bargain. You're coming in around $1,000 for a 1650 GPU, 6-core i7, 512 gig SSD, and 16 gigs of RAM for about $1,000. So it's in the same level as the Helios that we looked at earlier. There's a couple of standouts for value. You'll also find that it's available in a number of different GPUs, up to, I think, 2070, so you can really run the gamut on the Legion laptop. Now, what I don't like is the battery life is not stellar, at least from every review I could read. It's only a 45 watt hour or a 60 watt hour battery, and neither of those is impressive at all. So if battery life is important to you, the Legion is not the laptop for you. If it isn't though, you get a nice quality. It's got good build quality. It's got nice venting and thermals, as you can even see from this image here. It's got kind of a unique hinge design that I guess is going to be a little bit polarizing. It's kind of offset a little bit forward, but you got good thermals as a result. It's definitely an interesting choice. Now next up, it's kind of like HP. I'm including this one for completion. Yeah, it's okay. It's the Surface line. Now the Surface laptop or the Surface Book, I don't know, one of those two. I always get them mixed up. It has a GPU in it. Now, the reason I'm pointing this one out is as of the time I am doing this video, like literally right now at the mid to end point of September, there are all kind of rumors about a new Surface coming very, very, very soon with a completely new AMD processor and GPU that might be very interesting. The Surface line is very unique. I actually did a video on the Surface Pro. I don't recommend it as a game dev machine because it does not have a dedicated GPU, but it is definitely a machine. I use it as my travel machine and as my backup. And then they also have like higher end machines where you get a GPU in the base when you're docked and then an integrated GPU when you undock. So the Surface line is definitely interesting. It's the current line, like literally available today, is outdated, and we really want that refresh. It's going to come in a week or two's time, apparently. Next up, and this one I'm not even going to narrow it down to a single model because, oh my God, they have so many models. But what you're probably looking at is something like a Stealth if you want thin. The Stealth line is definitely the thin line. There is the Leopard line. There is the Raider line. Let's just say MSI needs to trim down their brands a bit. And then we got Titan, if you don't care how incredibly huge it is. But what we're talking about here is MSI. Now, MSI, you can kind of look at the three companies that really are pushing gaming laptops originally were Gigabyte, MSI, and Razer. And MSI has always... They keep up with the times. They'll create something that, you know, VR was a big thing. They have something that was made specifically for VR. They're really strong in gaming. Almost every laptop they make is going to be a solid choice. Now, their build quality has always been a little iffy for me, and that's why I've personally never gone with an MSI. A lot of times it seems a little cheap when you push down on them, but that's my personal opinion there. The specs are incredible, and I hear good things from them. Now, the battery life kind of runs the gamut, and a lot of times MSI doesn't put a lot of preference in the battery. But the truth of the matter is, MSI is the most confusing brand to try and make sense of. They have so many options out there that trying to narrow down, do you want the GT, the GS, the GE, the GP, the GL, or the GF series? Oh, good luck with that. And I can't really narrow it down for you because there's so much overlap between those. But MSI is definitely one worth checking out. Every single thing here is some kind of gaming focus. But here you see, this one's focused on portability, enthusiasts, so that's their entry level, more gaming, different gaming. Like their branding is just stupid. They got to narrow this down to make 2 or 3. Listen, we got gaming, enthusiast, game further, starting on gaming, and leap into gaming. What the heck is the distinguishing category there? But anyways, they make solid machines, very gaming focused. So that is an area, MSI probably won't steer you wrong, but their branding is confusing as heck. And then finally, we have Razer. And Razer is interesting. I'm not specifically, they make 3 models right now, which is actually kind of nice. There's more flexibility. It used to basically be the Razer laptop, the Blade, and the Blade 17. And they were the original thin and light. I got a Blade the first year they came out, 2013, I think, and it was an amazing machine. And it's actually one of the few machines where people walked up and went, ooh, what is that? You know, they would actually stop and talk to me about what a cool machine it was. Well, what they've done now is they've split it out. They've got the base model and the advanced model. This is basically the Blade as it was. This is a cheaper version. Now, cheaper when it comes to Razer is a bit of a misnomer, but they are definitely more affordable in that they cost less than $2,000. So you can spend out the wazoo for a Razer, but you're also able to get up to a 2080 with 240 hertz screen, SSD drive, 16 gigs of RAM. Interestingly enough, that is your only option. But you see here, the advanced model is 0.7 inches, the base model is 0.78, And then we get a ton of different configurations options there, but you're paying for it with the Blade. Now, the interesting thing with the Blade is they also have the Blade Stealth. Now, this is an Ultrabook, and this is a completely unique machine in that the Blade Stealth is a 13-inch Ultrabook, but it now has a 1650 GPU in it. So that is pretty powerful stuff. Now, I don't know if the Stealth is widely available yet, but it is perhaps, all right, get your pop-ups out of my way. Pop-up, it's perhaps the most interesting laptop out there as far as I'm concerned. So here, you've also got the Blade Stealth in this new year model. Last year, they went with like an MX, kind of a semi-dedicated GPU, which was better than what you had otherwise. But here's where the Ultrabooks really shine. 13 hours of battery life advertised. Now, you're never going to get that, but it is an all-day battery for sure. Kind of competes with the XPS. Now, what you're seeing here is they're still advertising as the MX 150 model, but they have announced the 1650, so a real bona fide GPU in this form factor. So that's one of the most interesting machines out there, in my opinion. It's one of the few 13-inch models that actually has good graphics in it. It may actually be the only one out there. So this is kind of a unique machine, but you're going to pay heavily for it. And then finally, there's Electronics. Now, this one is kind of out of nowhere. This is a partnership between Electronics and Intel, and it's just a really powerful machine that's being reviewed incredibly well. So you see you can get it an 8 GB model, 2070 machine, 9750 spec, 512 gig SSD on the low end. You can even get Optane memory in it. You can get like a really solid, nice form factor. And they're actually clear. They're calling this, I think they're claiming the lightest out there. So it's an ultralight magnesium alloy, 15.6 inch, 144 hertz gaming laptop. They're not out as of yet. They're coming very, very soon. They're a brand name I do not know at all. There's kind of a minimalist thing going on here. Apparently, they've got very good thermals. They got very good port selection. And they got pretty good specs at a pretty good price. But again, this is a brand I know literally nothing about. But 4.15 pounds with a massive battery life. It's definitely an interesting machine for sure. So I'm kind of pumped about this guy. 94 watt hour battery. So you're looking, this is in the same category as the Gigabyte Aero and very few other machines. I think the Razer Advanced is similar in spec. Going back, I think we also had the Asus ROG Zephyrus is similar in spec, and that's about it. So if you want kind of like a dream package, but you know, I'm not going to tell you that $2,000 is cheap, but $2,000 is oh, that's for the 60 and 60. All right, let's see what it is here. All right, 2,400. 2,400 is by no means cheap at all, but for the specs, it's really solid. So it's going to be interesting to see what exactly happens from Electronics. But yeah, that is it. That is the end of the recommendations, at least as the machines go. And one thing you may notice through all of this guide is that laptops this gen are kind of expensive. And I'm not going to argue with you, to be honest. The 20 series of cards got quite pricey, and everyone moved to this thin form factor, which means a more expensive manufacturing cost. There's no questions there. So what should you do? Well, it kind of depends on you, your wallet, what you need right now. Now, personally, I'm skipping this generation, to be honest, because I think, well, RTX is going to catch on. It's not going to be useful until the second gen, in my humble opinion. Now, if I didn't have a solid 1080 powered machine right now, I would probably get something at about a actually, you know what? I would probably get the Razer Blade Stealth if I was going to get anything at this point in time. But the RTX thing, I honestly think it's next gen that they're going to really kick butt. So what you could really kind of look for is like last gen's laptops on clearance. A 1080, still new, is a damned good machine, which will run any modern machine, any game at max specs for the most part for a number of years to come. And you're just not going to get RTX. So it's kind of the equivalent of, again, picking up a 2070 machine from this year. And there were some really nice machines made last gen. So if the budget is pushing you a little high, look for clearance sales. So stuff being pushed out of market, or wait until the next gen of this gen. So basically, when the i10 starts to come out, which is supposed to be on just over the horizon, when the second gen of RTX cards come out, when the new AMD cards all come out, it'll either push price pressure down a bit, hopefully get slightly cheaper laptops as a result, or it will make RTX more proliferation, more useful for it. and you will have a fast enough silicon that you can really take advantage of it. Because right now, as I mentioned, even on the top end machines, kind of hitting those ultra settings over 60 frames per second settings with RTX turned on are impossible right now. And that's kind of not acceptable if you're going to be forking out this kind of cash. So you may want to look at the clearance type stuff, or you may want to wait a few months. But if you don't have anything, you're not replacing anything, the real sweet spot this gen really seems to be those 1650 and 1660 base cards. But if money is no object, the Gigabyte Aero and the Razer Advanced and so on, those are just beautiful machines, as is the ROG Zephyrus, if you can handle that front of the keyboard thing. And that would drive me insane, I think, but I'd need some time to really figure out if I could handle it. Anyways, that is the 2019 guide. Hopefully, I hate to end it on a bit of a downer there, but that is my honest opinion if it comes down to it. Some really great machines, and the nice thing is there's a lot around that $1,000 price point that is really good machines. So the Helios 300, they're not all coming to me, but I just covered it all. There's a bunch of nice 1650 base or 1660 base cards right in that sweet spot of about $1,000, and anything lower than that, you're just not getting. You're getting crap, to be honest. So that seems to be the magical spot. And then to go above that, you're kind of squeezing down the form factor and so on. Just be careful about thermals. Watch out. That's something that isn't really shown on the paper specs, but that's why you got to watch out for things like the XPS and so on. If the case can't handle the stuff that's being put into it, there's no sense paying for it. Okay, that's it. Talk to you all later. Goodbye.